At the mouth of the Halifax and Indian Rivers, where shifting sands meet the Atlantic, the red brick tower at Ponce de León Inlet rises above scrub and palmetto like a fixed point in a restless landscape. At 175 feet, it's Florida's tallest lighthouse, and among the tallest in the United States, a daymark of brick and iron that has endured storms, wars, and the rise and fall of maritime technologies. Today, it is not only a working private aid to navigation, but also a museum campus renowned for its collection of historic Fresnel lenses and one of a handful of American light stations designated a National Historic Landmark. Yet the site's serenity belies a more turbulent past, an aborted first lighthouse destroyed during the Second Seminole War, a tragic drowning that claimed the chief engineer overseeing the present tower's construction, and fatal accidents that punctuated the keeper's daily grind. In their wake linger stories, some documented, some folkloric, about footsteps on iron treads, the whiff of kerosene that has no business being there, and the mischievous energy of a keeper's son lost too soon. Long before Daytona Beach's high-rises and the modern town of Ponce Inlet, the federal government sought to mark the hazardous bar at Mosquito Inlet with a lighthouse. The first tower was completed on the south side of the inlet in 1835, but the light never shone. Oil for the lamp wasn't delivered in time, storms scoured sand away from the foundation, and, most decisively, the outbreak of the Second Seminole War turned the site into a target. In December 1835, Seminole warriors attacked the shuttered tower, smashing the lantern glass and burning the wooden stairs. Repairs proved impossible in wartime. The compromised structure collapsed the following year. That failed beginning left the inlet unlit for nearly half a century, during which wrecks continued to remind navigators why the coast needed a reliable beacon. A renewed federal push in the 1880s chose a more suitable site on the north side of the inlet. Construction began in 1883 under the supervision of Chief Engineer Orville E. Babcock, a former Civil War general and aide to Ulysses S. Grant. The project's logistics were daunting. Materials ferried across bar and river, tramways laid, and a massive brick shaft rising course by course. The work was as dangerous as it was ambitious. Contemporary reports note multiple schooners wrecked during lighthouse supply runs and several lives lost on the bar. In December 1884, tragedy struck at the heart of the project. Babcock and 3 others drowned while crossing the inlet, a blow that reverberated through the lighthouse board and delayed completion. Still, the work continued. By late October 1887, the tower stood finished, fitted with a first-order fixed Fresnel lens, an 1867 Barbier Fenestre masterpiece capable of casting a steady beacon roughly 20 miles to sea. On November 1st, 1887, the light was officially kindled. The first principal keeper, William Rowlinski, took charge that same year, inaugurating a routine of maintenance, watch standing, and weather that would define the station for generations. The Mosquito Inlet Light Station operated through the turn of the century with incremental improvements. In 1909, the lamp was converted from straight kerosene to an incandescent oil vapor system, hotter, brighter, more efficient. In the early 1920s, the keepers' dwellings gained bathrooms, indoor plumbing, and electricity from a gasoline generator, luxuries in a remote post. Then, in August 1933, the tower's lighting plant was electrified, and the original first-order fixed lens was replaced by a third-order revolving Fresnel lens with a distinctive flashing signature. The 1920s also brought a rebranding. Mosquito Inlet, however accurate, was poor marketing for a growing resort coast. In 1927, for tourism and real estate purposes, state and local authorities renamed it Ponce de León Inlet, honoring the Spanish explorer. The lighthouse service followed suit, and the station's official name changed accordingly. The beacon's reach was not just physical, but cultural. In 1897, journalist-novelist Stephen Crane survived the sinking of the SS Commodore off Florida and rowed toward the Mosquito Inlet light, an experience he later transmuted into his celebrated short story, The Open Boat. The lighthouse's steady presence thus flickers too in American literature. When the US Lighthouse Service merged into the Coast Guard in 1939, Ponce de León Inlet Lighthouse was no longer just a civilian navigational aid. It became a strategic outpost on a coastline that only 2 years later would face the very real threat of enemy attack. In 1942, Florida's east coast became part of what historians now call the Second Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boats prowled the waters, targeting tankers and freighters carrying fuel and supplies. Between January and May of that year alone, more than 24 ships were sunk off Florida, some within sight of the beach. Burning oil slicks drifted ashore, and Floridians could sometimes see the silhouettes of stricken ships against the night horizon. In this tense environment, lighthouses like Ponce de León faced a paradox. Their beams were essential for American and Allied shipping, but they could also aid enemy submarines hunting inshore. The solution was compromise. At times, the Coast Guard dimmed or obscured the beam of the Ponce light, or shifted its visibility with blackout shields, allowing friendly vessels to navigate without providing U-boats with a bright, fixed target. The wind pressed hard against the tower that night, rattling the panes of the lantern room. Seaman Second Class Robert Jenkins, barely 19, leaned his elbows against the iron railing of the gallery. He'd been a farm boy from Georgia only a year ago, but now he stood on Florida's coast, eyes straining over the dark Atlantic. The light was burning, but not in its full glory. Wartime orders had required it to be hooded. Its beam narrowed and shaded, throwing just enough glow for American vessels to recognize the inlet, while denying a steady mark to prowling U-boats. To Jenkins, the light felt strange that way, like a proud voice forced into a whisper. Below, the surf pounded across the bar. Somewhere out beyond the black horizon, German submarines were hunting. Earlier that spring, he'd watched from this very gallery as flames lit the night sky 20 miles north. A tanker struck and burning like a torch in the sea. Even from here, he could smell the acrid tang of oil drifting in on the wind. Tonight, the water seemed too calm, too quiet. He shifted nervously, the barrel of his Springfield rifle gleaming faintly under the muted lantern glow. Down on the beach, 2 of his shipmates walked a patrol line, their shadows stretching long with each sweep of a hooded flashlight. Inside the keeper's quarters, now barracks for the Coast Guard, another watchstander kept the radio alive, listening to static-filled chatter from Jacksonville. They'd been told to stay alert. U-boat activity was reported along the Florida coast again. Any silhouette on the horizon might be friend or foe. Jenkins rubbed his eyes and leaned closer over the rail. For a moment he thought he saw something, just a dark shape against the waterline. He froze, heart thumping, but then it was gone, swallowed by the waves, or perhaps just a trick of his imagination. Still, he knew the danger was real. More than 24 ships had already been lost along this stretch of water that year. He turned back toward the lantern, its Fresnel lens casting narrow slices of light across the inlet. It wasn't the brilliant flash it had been before the war, but to the boy sailor on watch that night, it was still the strongest thing standing between chaos and order, an unblinking eye on a coastline that felt fragile in the shadow of war. And so he kept his post, listening to the sea, waiting for dawn. The presence of U-boats triggered blackout rules along the Florida coast. Households near the water covered their windows. Streetlights were extinguished or shaded. At Ponce de León Inlet, the red brick tower loomed in darkness many nights, its traditional beam subdued to a ghostly glow. For keepers and coast guardsmen alike, This was unsettling, protecting mariners while simultaneously hiding from an enemy just offshore. By the end of the war, the Allies had gained control of the Atlantic and the coast settled into relative peace. Yet Ponce de León had been permanently changed. The war had accelerated technological advances. Radio beacons, radar, and electronic navigation were increasingly supplementing the visual beam of a lighthouse. By the early 1950s, the Coast Guard's manpower was needed elsewhere, and in 1953, Ponce de León was fully automated. The wartime years had marked the last time the lighthouse played a frontline role in national defense, a moment when its lantern wasn't just a guide for commerce, but a participant in a global conflict. Life at the Ponce de León Inlet Lighthouse was not only about shining a beacon across the restless Atlantic, it was also about endurance, responsibility, and sacrifice. The men and women who lived here shouldered a burden invisible to the ships they guided. Long nights of watch, isolation from the mainland, and the unrelenting hazards of both sea and station. For some, that burden became fatal. The greatest loss occurred before the lighthouse was even finished. Chief Engineer Orville E. Babcock had already led a life of distinction. He was a Civil War general, an aide to President Ulysses S. Grant, and now the man entrusted with building a towering beacon on Florida's wild inlet. By late 1884, the work was progressing steadily. The brick tower had begun to climb, scaffolding clung to its flanks, and supply ships made frequent runs across the dangerous inlet bar. On a December day, Babcock attempted to cross the inlet by boat with 3 others. The weather turned treacherous, waves churned against the shallow bar, and currents caught the vessel broadside. The boat overturned. In the chaos, all 4 men were swept under, dragged by currents too strong for even seasoned oarsmen. Their bodies were later recovered, a grim reminder of how unforgiving the waters could be. Babcock never saw the tower completed. His death cast a shadow over the project and underscored the risks faced by every worker hauling brick, stone, and timber across the inlet. Even before the first beam of light cut through the darkness, the lighthouse had claimed its first lives. The lighthouse's interior spiral staircase is a marvel of ironwork, winding 203 steps to the lantern. But on October 26, 1919, those stairs became the stage for tragedy. First Assistant Keeper Joseph B. Davis was performing the most routine of duties, carrying a brass can of kerosene up the narrow stairwell to fuel the lamp before nightfall. Davis was not young. The climb was arduous, the air inside the brick shaft heavy with heat and the smell of oil. Partway up, he suffered a sudden massive heart attack. Alone inside the tower, he collapsed. As dusk fell, mariners offshore looked for the light that never appeared. Second Assistant Keeper Benjamin Stone, concerned, began searching. When he reached the spiral, he found Davis's body, still and silent against the iron stairs. The light was eventually kindled that night, but Davis's death lingered like an echo. To this day, many visitors claim to hear phantom footsteps on the stairs or smell a faint trace of kerosene in the air. An echo, they say, of Davis's final climb. 3 years later, tragedy struck again. This time outside the tower, in the keeper's yard. John Lindquist, the principal keeper, had worked the station for years, often with the help of his son William, who served as assistant keeper. The station was more than a workplace. It was a home, complete with stables and a garden. Horses provided vital service, hauling supplies and firewood. But in 1922, while tending to the horses, William was suddenly kicked. The blow was brutal and catastrophic. Despite frantic efforts, he succumbed to his injuries. For John, the loss was more than professional. It was deeply personal, a father watching a son taken by the very life they shared in service of the lighthouse. Locals whispered that William's spirit remained on the grounds, his youthful energy unwilling to let go. Over the decades, stories grew of doors slamming shut on calm days, and objects mysteriously moved in the keeper's quarters. Mischief that storytellers often attribute to the restless presence of the keeper's son. These were not isolated incidents. Life at Ponce de León Light demanded constant negotiation with danger. Keepers braved hurricanes that rattled glass panes and shook brick walls. They rowed across the inlet to collect supplies or mail, never sure if shifting sands would capsize their boats. Even the simple act of trimming a lamp wick carried risk. One slip of a fuel can and fire could rage out of control. Maritime reports also document schooners wrecked on the inlet bar while carrying supplies during construction. Each wreck a reminder that the very waters the lighthouse was meant to safeguard were also its most lethal adversary. It is estimated that at least half a dozen men perished in these accidents before the tower was completed in 1887. For the keepers and their families, each tragedy was a reminder that duty came first, even in grief. After Davis died on the stairs, the light still had to be lit that night. After young William's accident, his father still tended to the lantern, ensuring mariners could find their way past the shoals. This unwavering commitment forged the lighthouse's character. Each brick in the tower is bound not only with mortar, but also with the memory of those who gave their lives to keep its beacon burning. Ponce's timeline parallels Florida's broader coastal history. Spanish exploration and boosterish myth-making, the 1927 renaming, the age of steam and screw, the vulnerabilities revealed by 2 world wars, and the post-war march toward automation. During World War II, U-boats reminded coastal communities, including those near Ponce, that shorelines can become front lines. Dimming a lighthouse to foil an enemy while still protecting navigation is the kind of compromise wartime demanded up and down the Atlantic. Ponce also epitomizes the preservation era, a 1970s citizen movement rescuing endangered maritime heritage, followed by decades of restoration and education. Its National Historic Landmark designation in 1998 places it among an elite group of US lighthouses recognized for exceptional integrity and national significance. Climb the 203 iron steps, and you'll pass landings that once groaned under fuel cans and the boots of keepers hustling to meet dusk. There's a hush that settles as the spiral tightens, a stillness conducive to both history and haunting. From the gallery, the view unfurls the story. Bars and breakers, river and ocean, and a coast whose fortunes rose with safe passage. If you catch a faint, oily sweetness on the air in the stairwell, something like old lamp fuel, you will be in good company. Many have smelled it and thought of First Assistant Keeper Davis's final climb. Whether that's memory playing tricks, modern chemistry, or something ineffable, the sensation sutures past to present in a place already steeped in continuity. Lighthouses are machines with souls. At Ponce de León Inlet, the soul is compounded of work and weather, hazard and heroism, community and craft. Its record of tragedy is real, names and dates etched into the station's story. Its ghost lore is a folkloric afterimage of lives lived intensely in service of mariners they would never meet. Today, the light still flashes, the lenses still refract, and the tower's brick still warms in the Florida sun. History, tragedy, and the stories that linger. At Ponce, they're not competing narratives, but interlocking prisms, each catching a different angle of the same enduring beacon.